and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. We're rolling out a new look today. So basically what I've done, just to fill everyone in, I put us all in different video boxes. We got that figured out. Our names are now underneath our videos. So I'm in the top left this time. Matty B's in the bottom left. Jeffrey's at the top. In the bottom right here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put some of the stats and stuff. Now, I know this is going to be kind of hard to see unless you're on full screen. So I'm looking into different ways to get those out there. What I'll do after the show is I'm just going to go ahead and rapid fire tweet anything that we talked about or used on the show, so you can follow along there. I also set up a Reddit. You can see that in the middle under our social section. So subscribe to the Reddit, and most of the links and things that we share with each other, we're going to go ahead and post there so that you can see articles and like videos. So last week, I think I tried to show a video for Major League Baseball. I think we did the slide. Well, YouTube went ahead and yanked it, so I blacked it out when that went live on YouTube. So that's an example of, we're going to take that slide video, that's going to go in the Reddit. So if it's something that we talk about on the show, you can view it if it gets cut out of the video for YouTube blocking it or whatever. Then we have the normal Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Instead of me sitting here rattling them off, you can go ahead and just copy them. We have an email set up. If you have any questions or anything and you don't use social media, fire us an email. And brand new, the voicemail, we talked about it. That is now set up. So our number's at the top. It is 412-330-1512. If you leave a voicemail, there's a good chance we're going to use it on the show. So if you have any comments, questions, you want to leave something, you want to add some 2 cents, you can also message us, and we could even add you to the show if you want to come on. So that's just the changes you'll see this week. Our logo got changed a little bit more to Pittsburgh colors, since that's basically where we're from. And so you'll be seeing that. I'll be rolling out other changes to social media. But follow us, subscribe, all that's on there now. So I'm not going to be rattling them off at the end of each show. So we're going to go ahead and get started now that that's out of the way. First thing, we're going to talk about the NFL. I know we teased some stuff last week, but I have to start with this Washington Redskins thing. So the NFL shop, I sent it to you guys. I don't know if you saw it, but they decided to sell license plates that represent our states. So they had one for each state. I think when I looked, there were like 6 teams that had one. Well, the Washington Redskins, if you know your United States geography, they're located in Washington, D.C., which is basically a part of Maryland. It got cut out to do where the White House is and everything. So it's on the East Coast. And for the license plate, they went ahead and put the actual Washington state outline, which is on the West Coast, completely different state. And they went ahead and somehow it made it through QA. So that was actually on their website for sale. They have taken it down. I think they sent out a notice, but I don't have it to read it, because with the new layout, we're just going to be showing some images here. But you can see it in the bottom right, Redskins. Either of you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. You would think there's a lot of players, sometimes that end up getting drafted there, and their first thought is to have it attached to the state of Washington. Why they would do that, I have no idea. It had to have been a blunt on someone's side. But honestly, how does that slip by however many executives and people in the league? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, just to touch on that, I think it's pretty absurd. You have so many people in the NFL, fact checkers, people who pay attention to this kind of stuff with the media, and for them to all drop the ball on this is unbelievable. When the NFL is as large as it is, and you have so many people working for you, to have a blunder this large is unbelievable.
All right, so we'll get that out of the way. A little bit of stupidity there by someone. And now we're going to go ahead and bring up what we teased last week. So Football Outsiders, I'm not familiar with them, but they went ahead and they ranked who they thought were the top 30 defenses in the last 30 years. And I saw Speak for Yourself, one of the other sports shows, they went ahead and tweeted out the top 5. And number 1, speaking of absurd, is the 1991 Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know how they came up with this, but if you're familiar, that 1991 Eagles team didn't even make the playoffs that year. So how they could be ranked the number 1 defense of all time, or not all time, but the last 30 years, is crazy to me. I'll even bring up here, this is going to be the Wikipedia, and again, I'm going to tweet these out, but this is the Eagles schedule. It's going to be hard to see, but the red are their losses. Their defense had a four-loss streak going in the middle of September, and basically all of October they didn't get a win. And they're giving up 30 points in some of these losses. Even some of their wins, 30, 33 or something to 30. I mean, I just don't get it. I don't understand if they're trying to just give. Was Reggie White on that team? If that's where they're coming from, they're thinking like maybe the top pass rush. But I'll bring up the top 5. You can take a look at them. Go ahead, Matt. Fire away on this.
One of the things I think when they're talking about the defensive starters on that 91 Eagles team, you're looking at Reggie White, you're looking at Jerome Brown, you're looking at Clyde Simmons, Seth Joyner. I mean, it was a defense that, if you remember playing Tecmo Super Bowl, the original version, they had a really stout defense. I don't think necessarily they may have put up some video game numbers, but I think there was a team that was very Buddy Ryan-esque as far as defense is concerned, where they played well at times, but they just really struggled to put it all together and be able to overcome that. When I was thinking of overall defenses, one of the big ones was that 2000 Ravens defense. And as I was looking at some of the stuff with that, the thing that stood out to me was how poor the quarterbacks were that they played that year. I mean, when you look, Pittsburgh was going through a transition and was dealing with like Kent Graham at quarterback, or like whatever that period was before Roethlisberger where there was craziness. You had Cincinnati had Achilles Smith. Like, they really weren't going up against any kind of difficult quarterback. Their only real tough team that they had to play that year was when they had the Titans and had to deal with McNair. That was probably the only quarterback on their schedule that they really would potentially give them fits, and he was more of a run threat than a throwing threat anyhow. So using that aggressive style of defense, it was easy to pin your ears back and get after him because you didn't really have a quarterback that could dissect them. To me, one of the defenses that stood out was that 2005 Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They came in as the low wild card seed. They had a young Troy Polamalu patrolling the secondary. They had Harrison that was on the bench at the time. They still had Foote. They had Ferrier. They had Joey Porter. They had a really good linebacking core. And the thing that stood out to me there was when they went through that playoff run in 2005, they went through Manning. They went through Brady. During the season, they played Favre and beat him up in Green Bay. And they went against Carson Palmer in the Super Bowl. So I mean, they went. It wasn't like they were going up against a bunch of Trent Dilfers. They were, Achilles Smith or Ryan Leaf type quarterbacks. They were going through quarterbacks that were arguably young in their prime type quarterbacks, and still was able to not only win the Super Bowl with that, but then set the tone for the next couple of years where they were able to have the other playoff appearances as well.
Yeah, just to feed off that, the 1991 Eagles doesn't make any sense to me. I know they had White. I saw that was the year that Randall Cunningham got hurt very early in the season, and Jim McMahon stepped in. Thinking about Jim McMahon, the 1985 Bears. I don't know how they're not on the list when you have the 1991 Eagles. And just to feed off you, Matt, I'd actually say that the 2008 Steelers defense was even better than the 2005, because that's when you bring in Lamar Woodley. Pretty sure that's the year that James Harrison won the Defensive Player of the Year. It was either him or Polamalu, back-to-back years of, if I'm not mistaken. That defense could really play some ball. They had pass rushers. Ike Taylor was locking people down on the island. Larry Foote, James Farrier, like you mentioned. Pretty solid defense. I'm pretty sure that was at the end of Aaron Smith's career, too. They had Kiesel. Pretty solid defense. And I'm trying to look at the list right now, but also another defense that gets overlooked a lot is the 72 Dolphins. That was the year they went on their great run. Pretty solid defense. If you want to bring out another defense, I can't remember what year it was, but it was when the Vikings were maybe in like the early Super Bowls, like the teens, like, I don't know, Super Bowl 11 or something like that. You had the Purple People Eaters. That front seven was extremely tough. I don't really know who made this list, but I think you can, you have a bunch of other teams that to mention. The 2000 Ravens, like you mentioned, very good. I don't know who they played. That year, the Steelers, I think that was when Cordell Stewart was still quarterback before Tommy Gunn came in. I mean, you had Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. That's a pretty solid defense. When you have defense like that, you can have Trent Dilfer win a Super Bowl. So that speaks volumes to that defense. The one defense on this list that I actually really do like is that Denver defense. They could really get after the quarterback, had a good secondary. I know this is recent bias, but even the Seahawks there with the Legion of Doom, they held defenses to an average of like 15 points a game, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Could rush the passer, had the secondary. But as far as the 91 Eagles, they just don't cut it. When you can't make the postseason, it doesn't really matter.
Well, I think just to go off this, for 30 years, Jeff, I think that's going to be, 1987? So that's why the Bears and the Dolphins weren't on. But yeah, even the 2004 Bills, that they don't stand out. So just thinking, if someone told me on the street, like, hey, name some of the top defenses, Bills would never be mentioned in the past 30 years. Maybe like the early 90s Jim Kelly defenses, but even then, I could think of other ones. The Eagles, no way either. So you mentioned a couple that I was going to bring up. The Seahawks defense that crushed Peyton Manning in that Super Bowl, where they got the safety. I think it was a safety, or they got the fumble early, pretty much just like ended the game within 5 minutes. And even going back, like you mentioned, the Steelers, you could throw any of those New England Patriots defenses up. They had Ty Law. You had a great secondary for the Patriots that allowed a young Tom Brady to take down the greatest show on turf. If you look at like one of the early Patriots defenses. And another one that I think always gets overlooked is the 1994 San Francisco 49ers. Their secondary had Merton Hanks and they had Deion Sanders, two basically all pros throughout their careers. Ken Norton Jr. at linebacker. The defensive line was awesome, Dana Stubblefield, and they pretty much steamrolled the Chargers in the Super Bowl. And you could even go back with the 1990 49ers whenever they crushed, the John Elway Broncos team? It's like 55-10. Like, that's a good defense whenever you can have your team in control. And that one had Ronnie Lott and a bunch of the other same guys that they had carry over for a couple of years there. But looking at that, like, I would say definitely I would take the 1990 or 1994 49ers, take your pick, over both the Eagles and the Bills. You could pick your pick of Patriots defenses or Steeler defenses from their two Super Bowl years. And I'm not saying that the team has to win the Super Bowl, but whenever you're that dominant, I feel like a great defense, like to me, my top 1 and 2 would have been the Ravens at number 1 just because of their quarterback play that year. And yeah, they didn't play a lot of good quarterbacks, but that one stands out to me as probably the best defense I've seen in my life. The second one would be that Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, because I remember going into that game, everyone thought the Raiders were going to run away in the Super Bowl because they had Jerry Rice, because they had Tim Brown, guys that they thought, oh, these guys are going to give them fits. They had Rich Gannon. He was throwing all kind of records that year. And that game was basically a non-game. I think John Lynch had a couple interceptions, basically shut them down.
Yeah, Dexter Jackson, I believe, had 2 or 3 interceptions in that Super Bowl. The thing that helped Tampa Bay in that Super Bowl was the fact that Gruden had just gone from Oakland to the Buccaneers. So he already knew everything that they were going to run and was able to game plan accordingly. And plus having that extra motivation of Al Davis letting them go, I think took away from that. Looking at that Baltimore Ravens team though, people are real quick to throw Trent Dilfer under the bus, but he came over to the Ravens from Tampa Bay as Tampa was starting to go down that slide where they weren't scoring points offensively. And when you look at that team, they had young Jamal Lewis, who was over 1,000-yard rushers that season. They had Shannon Sharp. They had weapons. It wasn't like they were rolling out a Pop Warner team. I mean, they weren't scoring a lot of points, but they didn't really have to. All they were really looking to do was to score 17 points a game, and it was enough their defense was just going to take control and win the rest of the game. They didn't have to get into a shootout like you do nowadays, where with certain teams, if you don't score at least 28, 35 points a game, you don't stand a chance.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Also, to bring up the Buccaneers once again, Dexter Jackson actually won the MVP of that Super Bowl, which is kind of crazy when you have such a defense, such a run-stopping defense with Warren Sapp up front. I'm pretty sure that's also Rodney Barber, played the corner for that team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Phenomenal corner. I don't really, honestly, to say this, I don't really remember what that offense had. I don't know who played quarter. Oh, it was Brad Johnson. That's right. Yeah. Brad Johnson at quarterback. Who was the running back of that team? I honestly can't think of it off the top of my head.
Was the fullback. Mike
Allstott was the fullback. It was, I believe, Ernest Graham, maybe. It was one of the bigger running backs. It was after Warwick Dunn left. But at wide receiver, they had Joe Jurevicius. They had Keyshawn Johnson. I mean, they traded for him in that offseason before, it was a year or two before their Super Bowl run. So they added, and I think that was really one of the playmakers that got them over the hump. Because for years they were just a team that they would get to Philly, and then the McNabb run teams during that time where the Eagles were going on their runs with Andy Reid coaching were able to really steamroll. But it was like once Gruden came over and started getting his system into place, they got a couple athletes, they were able to put enough offense together to let Monty Kiffin's defense take over.
Do either of you guys have any other thoughts on this before we change topics?
Just if I had to rank my teams like you did, I hate to say it, I'd probably put the Ravens at number one, that 2000 Ravens. I'm very biased. I think the Steelers, the 2008 Steelers, when you consider Troy Polamalu, what he did, James Harrison with the pick six before halftime of that Super Bowl against the Cardinals, that'd be my second best team. And then three, the more we talk about the Buccaneers, you're right, that defense was ferocious. So that might be my top three. And I hate the Patriots so much, but one of those early years, maybe that 2001 defense, or maybe the defense when they played the Eagles, those are some pretty solid defense. You have Teddy Bruschi and all those guys. I'd have to put them maybe the 4 or 5. Maybe the Patriots take two of those top 5 picks there, 4 and 5. But that would have to be my top 3 to 5 would be those teams.
I definitely think that Baltimore Ravens defense has to be in the mix. I don't know if they're that top one, because for as dominant as they were, it was a one-time deal. It wasn't like they were able to maintain that consistency. And one of the things that I looked at the coaching staff on that team to see what pieces were there from that run. When you look, Marvin Lewis was the defensive coordinator. You had Rex Ryan as the defensive line coach. You had Jack Del Rio. And I believe Mike Nolan might have been there as well. So that they had, or Mike Smith, for the former coach over Atlanta. So they had a number of future NFL head coaches in the wings too. It wasn't like they had a lesser talent of coaches that were pulling these guys up. With all those future coaches in the wing, you would think that they would have been able to string together, at least another Super Bowl in the near future, as opposed to waiting as many years afterwards.
Yeah. I think we're all in consensus on that Ravens team. Some of the other ones, like I said, you can fill those in and take your picks. But again, it's slow season of the NFL. Everyone's the most popular sport in America. So we're definitely going to be talking about something NFL related each week. That's our topic for this week. I hate doing the lists, but for some reason, everyone has to make their own up. Even the NFL started to do their top 100 players list just to fill the space. But that's it this week. Top 5 defenses last 30 years. Ridiculous list. I don't know what their stats were, but it definitely wasn't wins. All right. Now, next one. I teased this last week too. College football revenue. Now, with this, I'm going to go ahead and tease our first real YouTube series spinoff. It's going to be under the Southbound Sports YouTube channel, so subscribe to that. But I'm going to be doing a little bit more look into the business of sports, something called Straight Cash or Straight Cash Homie, depending if we get shut down for that or not. But that's what we're going to be breaking down, so I wanted to do a little teaser on this. So a big topic, was it 2-3 years ago, with college football realignment. There were basically 6 conferences: the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big East. Well, it might have been 4 or 5 years ago now. West Virginia jumped to the Big 12 after Pitt went to the ACC. Syracuse went to the ACC. So now we're left with really 5 big conferences. The rest of those football teams from the Big East kind of split off, and now the Big East is a basketball-only conference. Well, it's looking like one of the 5 conferences, and I think it's the consensus across sports, but one of the 5 conferences is going to kind of be eaten up by the others, and I think we're going to end up with 4 conferences, and those 4 champions are bound to be in the college football playoffs. At least that's how it looks right now, unless they expand the playoffs from 4 to 8 teams or something. But that's just some background on it. Now, the Big Ten and the SEC have been the top 2 earners, with the SEC network being owned by ESPN. They've been ahead the past couple years. Well, I put the revenue up. It might be hard to see again. It's in the bottom right. This is the projected revenue for 2018. So the University of Michigan, last week or 2 weeks ago, they went ahead and they put out their projected revenue for next year. And they said that because of how much money they're going to get from the Big Ten network, they're going to have a surplus next year. So they're planning on taking another trip. Their football team went to Rome this past year, which is kind of outlandish if you think about it. They have a surplus so big that they're going to go ahead and take another trip overseas with their entire team, which football has 85 scholarship players. It's a ridiculous amount. So they go ahead and in this, they throw out the amount of money they're going to get from the Big Ten, which includes the Big Ten network. It's $51.1 million in 2018, which goes ahead and beats every other conference. Now, SEC is going to be making 45 plus. And again, this is the estimate, because the Big Ten and the SEC, along with the Pac-12, at this point, they all have their own networks. So if they get picked up, let's say the Big Ten gets picked up by Sling TV, that number could even go up higher. That's why the SEC has a plus beside it. Now, the one conference that doesn't have that has extra money, is the Big 12. Texas has the Longhorn Network, which I think is worth $15 million, which kind of bumps them up. They might still be the top earner. I'd have to crunch some numbers or see if that's what they actually make from that. But these are the numbers here. Big 10, $51 million. I sent it to you guys. SEC, $45 million. The Big 12's third. And again, that depends on schools. Like Texas is probably higher. $37.5. The Pac-12 at $32.5. And the number that's the biggest estimate I have is the ACC. Their number hinges on if they can get an ACC network off the ground. So I had a statement by Florida State Athletic Director Stan Wilcox. He thinks that the conference is going to go ahead and get that network off the ground, and it's going to bring in an estimated $3 million more off the bat. And again, if that gets picked up by DirecTV, Dish Network, that number could go up 10, 20 million. Who knows? So it's getting pretty crazy. There are rumors that some of the other schools are unhappy that they're going to try to get a bigger slice of this pie. But I know, Matt, you're a Florida State guy. What do you think of the ACC network?
I think it would be a good thing for them to at least put it out there. I know, the SEC is getting a lot of extra exposure because of it. I think the bottom line is you have to win and win consistently. And if you can do that, then it's going to help. It's been nice being a Florida State fan over the last couple of years with Jimbo Fisher coming back, that they've been playing in it. They've been asked to play in a lot of primetime games, and they've got that primetime coverage because of where they end up in the rankings. To be a lower level program, I think in the ACC, you end up losing out on a lot of exposure and TV time if you're not from, the Big Ten or the SEC, because they're gonna pull those conferences and those teams more to begin with. So I'm all for them to get that network off the ground and maybe give that extra exposure to some of those other teams.
Yeah, going off of Maddie said, I like it a lot too. Being in the East Coast, from Pennsylvania, West Virginia, where I've lived, you really have a Big Ten/SEC bias. You see them all the time. You have all the games, the primetime games. Going to Pitt, there was a lot of times where we had to stream Pitt games like in college. Going to Pitt, living in Pittsburgh, and we couldn't even get the game on TV. So schools like Pitt, North Carolina, Duke, some of these, schools that are pretty good football schools, but don't get, quite the exposure that other schools get. I think it's great for the conference. I think it takes away a little bit of that SEC lore that was, has been out there for the last couple of years with Alabama winning national championships. It gives schools like Clemson, Florida State that have been really good recently. It gives them a little bit more exposure. Because the one thing is funny, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe at this point, when USC was dominating college football, there was a lot of times, other than them playing on ESPN, you really want to see them. So nowadays, when you have, the Big Ten network, the SEC network, the Pac-12 network, it gives you a chance to watch more of these schools and to enjoy, watching them without streaming them illegally or whatever, however you're able to stream them. But what are your thoughts, Richie?
Well, I wanted to mention two things I forgot to mention when I first went over this. The Big Ten numbers, they're bound to go down. And this is the first projected number, I think, maybe this year. Nebraska finally gets a full share. So that number is going to be a little bit higher because I want to say the reason this is on my radar is Rutgers, they had a bunch of guys, like their media, someone came out and was complaining about their number. That year that Michigan's getting 51 million, Rutgers is getting 11. So that's $40 million difference. And it's not just Michigan, it's every other school, including Nebraska, I think, at that point. The only one that's going to be less is Maryland. And I don't know if they might have a huge drop off because the way their deal was structured, they were making extra money, but it was paying the ACC. So actually, if you look at the numbers from last year, the ACC made, I think, more, but that was because their number included the buyout from Maryland leaving. So the Big Ten was giving the ACC. That's why the ACC number looks lower right now. The payments are over, I think, for Maryland at this point, and they don't have their own network, unlike the rest of them. And the Big 12 doesn't either. The Big 12 number, to note, that was negotiated before I think those schools left. So that number was decided for 12 teams or 14 teams, whatever they had. I think it was 12. And so now their number is higher because they're not paying those other two schools. So that money is going into the pit and then going to the other 10 schools. So I think that's going to drop off. Looking at this, and I mentioned this to Matt years ago, I have a feeling like these conferences are either going to combine or something. Because if you look at the rate that the NBA got, I mentioned it last week, they had like $1 billion deal that everyone said was an awful deal. And these conferences are getting millions of dollars, but no one's really hit that $1 billion price. I think the Big Ten's is like 800 million. SEC's around the same, 800 million, but no one's hit the $1 billion. The easiest way for that to happen is for like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 to combine and have like some type of Rose Bowl conference where the winner of each side, like they still play in the Big Ten, like East or whatever versus West, but then their winners play in the Rose Bowl every year, and that's your one half of the playoffs. And then if the other conferences combine or whatever they end up doing, it just makes sense that it's not going to stop until there are probably like 64 teams and they split off and then they have their own conference. But the money is getting ridiculous. $50 million a year just for, and this isn't the gate. This isn't the big house tickets getting added in for Michigan. This is only from the conference, from, I think, television. They might split some of the seats or whatever, like a little bit of revenue sharing. But overall, this is only from the television deal.
Yeah, I think it's really, really something. I believe it was 2012 this all started. And what you're seeing is still like the domino effect happening 5 years later, because there's teams out there like a Boise State or, some of those schools that have competed in the last 10 years, but because of their conference haven't really had a legit shot, especially back in the BCS era. At least now the playoffs, if you have a good record, you're well respected, you're going to have a shot at the postseason. But back in the BCS days, Boise State didn't have a realistic shot at making the national championship. So I think what I brought up with the domino effect, I think you're going to have in the next maybe 3 years, you're going to have 4 power conferences. They're going to get away from the Big Five. It only makes sense with the college playoffs, and everyone loves money. Everything they do in college football is all about money. So in 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an 8-team playoff. So you make, all the other bowl games when you make all this money, have them essentially the play-in, have like 4 teams play into the college, football playoffs. So then you have 8-team totals. Like you said, maybe you have a Big Ten, Pac-12, Rose Bowl championship to make the national championship. At the end of the day, there's so much money in college football. They're going to figure it out. They're going to, milk it for all it's worth. And I can really see in the next 3 years, 4 power conferences, maybe 5 years, you have an 8-team playoff. But at the end of the day, all their moves are very strategic. It's all about money. It's all about, getting their school or their brand out there. Especially that's why it only makes sense for the ACC to have their own network, because then a team like Pitt, Duke, North Carolina, they can get some more national attention. Because last year, the only team that beat Clemson in the entire country was Pitt. I know that was kind of an upset, but at the end of the day, how much recognition did Pitt get last year? Not as much if they had an ACC network.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, Pitt, I think their AD came out for it, saying that they were actually having trouble affording the scholarships. They weren't able to fulfill the NCAA requirement that you had to pay. So they were close to actually cutting sports off, cutting off some of the lower revenue sports, just cutting teams so that they would be able to compete in the NCAA due to NCAA regulations. But with this conference change for them to go to the ACC, and they're picking up, because if you think back only 5 years ago, they were in the Big East. The Big East wasn't making 20. They were making 10, 5. It's a big jump, even if they jump from the Big East to the lowest conference based on these numbers here. I just don't know. When you're looking at that much money, if they went and they combined into one college Netflix type deal, where the Big Ten, even the Big Ten and the SEC, if they combined and then brought along some of the best of the other conferences, and they put together their own app like Netflix, and they made people pay $10 a month, they could pretty much break the $1 billion pretty fast, I would imagine. Because a lot of people don't like paying for cable, and there's no way to get that for sports. And unlike the NFL network or the NBA network, if most colleges have sports that go year round. So you're going football in the fall, then you have basketball. So I could see the Big Ten bringing in a Kansas or someone that people don't expect them to bring in to strengthen the basketball a little bit more, to have it more of a year-round network to bring people in to watch, because people are going to tune in to watch Kansas basketball, just like people tune in to watch Indiana basketball. Is it as a big number? It's going to be a big paying number. I mean, those, even if it's only a couple million, $10 that's $10 extra million or whatever just for a basketball team, just for that 1 month or whatever. So, I mean, it's going to be coming down to that. I just don't know. It's getting ridiculous if they're not paying players. And I've heard on the video game side, the EA Sports guy was kind of hinting that NCAA football is going to be back in the future, whether they pay for players like in one of those scholarship funds, or if they have to go ahead and have like teams with like generic players or like some type of generator. Like I think it's going to happen. I even think that they had one of the Madden highlights, one of the new Madden journeys or whatever, like players, you build them up from high school. They already have Texas and I think Oregon on board. So they're using like, you can actually play him through real schools as he's getting into the NFL. So they're getting the deals in place. They're going to go to the colleges directly instead of going through the NCAA. And that's another potential revenue source just for some of these teams.
One thing when you were mentioning a couple years ago when the conferences started aligning, like Michigan wanted maybe a Kansas for the Big Ten with their basketball presence. It was interesting in 2012 when the Big East was dissolving essentially. WVU wanted in the AC really bad. And a major reason why they didn't get into the ACC was because their academic standards weren't quite up to snuff compared to what the ACC wanted. And it made more sense for Pitt to go in to the ACC with their basketball presence. Unfortunately, recently, Pitt hasn't, played very well, haven't done very well with basketball. But when you look at realigning these conferences, they're going to do so with that in mind. What teams can you bring in to boost the football conference? Maybe a team that has a pretty good college baseball team or basketball. At the end of the day, when they align these conferences, they want it to make sense, with geography in mind, and also what can they bring to the table. Because a couple years ago, I thought WVU and Pitt were going to go to the ACC. I thought it just made sense with the backyard brawl rivalry and everything, but it didn't work out that way. WVU ended up being a pretty good fit for the Big 12 with their high-scoring offense and them not playing any defense, essentially. But I think it's going to be pretty interesting the next couple years. Like I said, I think they're going to have 4 major conferences, and it's going to be interesting where they piece people together. The one team I could definitely see going to the Pac-12 would be Boise State. I'm not sure if they're still in the Mountain Conference. Is that what it is? I'm not really
West,
sure.
Yeah.
Mountain West. Like, some of those conferences like that, I think in the next couple of years, they're going to start dissolving, and they're going to start, the teams that can play at that level are going to start migrating to those conferences. Boise State being the Pac-12 just makes sense. Utah's in it. It makes sense geographically and everything. But it's going to be pretty fun to watch the next couple of years.
But the one thing that I would say opposing that, and if you break it into only 4 conferences, then you're really putting your eggs in one basket. So if it turns out to be that you're down to only 4 conferences and you only have like a team like Alabama right now that's been on a roll with national championship consecutively, it really thins the rest of the conferences out, as opposed to maybe keeping things with, I think they're better off keeping the conferences as they are, having a bunch of different conferences, whether they're basketball focus or football focus, but then having it so that the criteria of what these selection committees are looking for is consistent across the board. Because I think they say conference championship is an important. So for a school like the schools in the Big 12 that didn't have a conference championship game in the past, they're given a chance to fix it so that if they aren't one of the original Power 5 schools, they can at least start to put the blocks in place that, they know that you have to win out. Like thinking of a Houston team that I thought was going to be a lot more competitive this year, that it was pretty much written out that they had to win out they had to win out every game. They couldn't have any stumbles. They ended up stumbling against Louisville and then later on against Navy, but it was spelled out what their avenue was for getting in. And the bottom line, it stays the same, regardless of if there's one conference or 19. If you win your games, then you get in. I think where you start to split hairs is when you get down to a 4-team playoff of, well, there's this team versus that team, and who deserves it better. Who, if you have that criteria of what you're looking for, and it's spelled out specifically as to points scored, total team defense, whatever it is, be consistent and then stick with that formula so that it's not, well, we go into this back room and it's, well, I'm a person from X school, so then I decide I want my team or a team from my conference to go in, so I'm just going to vote for them regardless of who deserves it. I think they're better off going in and going through a route where they're being consistent up front. It's being followed through to the back end, because even when you look at the NCAA tournament, when you're filling out that field of 64, 65 and 66 and 67, those teams still have a legitimate reason for making the tournament as compared to somebody else that's already in. No matter how big you make a tournament, there's always going to be that team or two that doesn't get in that's going to say, well, I deserve it more and I'm being left out. So I think you're always going to have that, whether you expand it from 4 to 6 or 4 to 8, whatever it looks like, you're still going to have those headaches along the way. But I think by spelling it out and just having clear criteria and then following that from week to week, it's not like, well, we like this team right now, so they're going to jump in and this team isn't going to make it. Whatever that standard is, I don't care, but have a standard and then stick to it.
Yeah. And I think, so it really comes down to, from these smaller schools, are they going to make more money from playing in these lower tier bowls like they make right now? Or would it be beneficial for Houston and some of the other lower schools that have been close, but not quite close enough, like Boise State, East Carolina, some of the ones I think Temple had a run maybe. Are those schools going to be able to make more money if they drop to their own division and have their own playoff? Is someone going to pay for that, or are they going to keep making enough money to get by? I personally don't think the Pac-12 is ever going to invite Boise, and there's already rumblings if you look out there, because there's not really any teams that they can lure into their conference. Their network's not getting picked up. So, what's going to happen? Is the Pac-12, are they going to become a lower tier conference over time? Football is the main driver. If USC is weak, I know they just beat Penn State in the Rose Bowl or whatever in crazy shootout. But if they're not having these top teams compete or make the playoffs every year, that's a huge chunk of money. And one conference, basically 3 conferences haven't been left out. That's the Big Ten, the SEC, and I think the ACC. They've been in it every year. They've had a team in the playoffs, and that's a huge chunk of money that the Big 12 and the Pac-12 haven't gotten within the past 3 years. And so if they're going to go ahead and build, I don't think they're really going to chop off and make 4 conferences. The Pac-12 might be desperate. They might be trying to pull in Texas and Oklahoma like they did a few years ago. Are they going to be able to land them? No. I don't know. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. If they don't land them, who are they going to get? They just can't expand for expansion's sake just because they need to get to some 16 number, or their revenue is going to go down even more because there's not that many people living in Idaho. That's just the facts. The Big Ten added Rutgers because they wanted all the money in New Jersey. Because even though Rutgers isn't a huge football school, they can say hey, state of New Jersey, this is a state-run institution. You should help us get this because it helps your state university. And they've had dividends from it. They've got payments. Maryland was in the black. They're out of the black now. They're into the black now, whatever. They're in the red, whatever it is. They were losing money. They were bankrupt pretty much a few years ago. They joined the Big Ten, even paying the ACC payout, $51 million. That's what the payout was, or whatever. I think that was what the buyout from the ACC was, $50 million. Based on these numbers, that's $20 million gap in 3 years. They make more than enough to justify that jump to the Big Ten. So some conferences have more power than others, and that's how it's going to play out. The Pac-12, I don't think, has anywhere to go. I don't think they're going to lure Texas. So do they drop out? Are they going to keep? I don't know.
See, that's the one thing. Going off of what I was talking about earlier with the Pac-12 trying to pull a Boise State in, trying to play a little devil's advocate here. When you look at the Pac-12, you have USD, such a prestigious school, known for football. Then you talk about the Big 12, Texas, Oklahoma. These are all schools, UCLA. These are all schools that have so much history in football. I just find it really hard to believe that these conferences, especially, I don't know which conference is going to, fold essentially, because I think that there's going to be 4 conferences, but is the Big 12 going to be the one to fold? Is it going to be the Pac-12? I'm not really sure, but if, like you said, if the Pac-12 and the Big 12 somehow combined, that would be one heck of a conference, because you'd have Texas, you'd have Oklahoma, USC, UCLA, Stanford, Oregon. Last 15 years, how Oregon's been. I don't know. It's just interesting, but I think the driving force, like you said, is money. When you have a Maryland that was doing really bad financially, they join a power conference like the Big 12. Everything's money driven. So wherever the money is going to shape how these conferences are going to look.
But if they go into a 4-team, if you're going to 4 conferences, how the hell do you split everyone into 4? Like, what does that look like then, as far as how you're playing, like who you're playing? Like, you're going to end up painting yourself into a corner, because if you take it, like, and I'll just use the Big Ten as a reference. If you're breaking it into 4 conferences, and now you have all your top tier, your top 4, top 5 teams that are deserving of a playoff spot are in that one particular conference, you really shoot yourself in the foot as far as getting a competitive playoff. Because if you're saying we won 4 conferences and those 4 conference champions are going to play, well, then you're cutting out 3 potentially competitive teams from not being able to compete. And I know the argument on the other side is, well, win your conference and you don't have to worry about it. But why should a Big Ten that maybe has more competition within its own conference be penalized versus, and I'll just say a Pac-10 school that they may have a lighter conference, an in-conference schedule that's lighter, mow right through it without a problem and have an easier spot. I think that's where you start splitting hairs, because if you're going to 4 teams, well, where's the motivation to pick up a more competitive conference? If I'm looking at it from like a Florida State standpoint, why would they want to pull in more people that could possibly take them out of the running for a national championship, or, to play on the bigger stage? You're better off with the way that it's currently set up. You're almost better off playing a bunch of community college or JUCO schools, because then you're going to definitively have those wins. You may not have the resume, but if you win out all your games and you still win out, your conference, then you should be in the driver's seat for the playoff.
That's why I don't think the 4 conferences is going to be a viable option, because you're still going to have that huge imbalance. It's still going to be the Big Ten and the SEC and everyone else. And so if you see the Big Ten getting into like a Netflix type deal, it makes much better sense to me that they would be, instead of just looking and picking and choosing and maybe having to settle for like some other school just to get subscribers, to make a 16-team conference, or some people are saying 18. I don't know how that would work, some kind of weird pod system. But yeah, what if they lure in Oklahoma from the Big 12? Because there's been rumors, I think Tom Osborne from Nebraska kind of hinted that Oklahoma's talked to him and they're interested in the Big Ten. What if they do join? And then you have a pretty awesome East and West, but you're going to have, let's say the conference championship is Oklahoma versus Ohio State, but then you have a 1-loss Penn State, a Michigan, or a Nebraska sitting there. Who's to say that they just don't decide, like, you know what? I think we should have our own champion be automatically in the national championship again. They could talk to the SEC and say, hey, do you just want our champions to play each other for the national championship? And who's going to say no? And then you go ahead and you lure in. It's a much better conference if that scenario happens, where the Big Ten turns to the SEC and they become if you think in NFL terms, the NFC versus the AFC. They kind of play throughout the year, and then they just kind of pick apart the other three conferences. They tell the Pac-12, they're like, hey, USC, Stanford, Oregon, whoever they want, like, you guys want to come play with us? You can play for a national championship. Yeah, you might have to leave some of your buddies behind, like Washington State or whoever, but are they really going to turn that deal down? Like, the only way is if the NCAA forces their hand, and with all the lawsuits and stuff, I just don't see the NCAA having that power.
I think that when you look at like how the Big Ten originally, or Big East originally formed, was a basketball school, and then they kind of tried to zero in on, you know, those schools that would be competitive basketball programs, and they were a super conference for a period of time. But the issue with that is trying to maintain that longevity. You know, when you have coaches that eventually, you have competitive coaches that then step down, if they're not right, spot on 100% right with that next person, now you have a team that's consistently in the top 10 that's going to fall completely out of contention. Now this conference that you are aligned for a certain thing, now it's not as viable because it's not as competitive. I think that's the risk that you run trying to break it into a smaller pod or conference type deal, where you better make sure that these programs have staying power as well.
That's why I think, like, in my scenario, just throwing the numbers in my head together, the Big Ten has 14 teams. If the Pac-12 has, I think they do have 12, that's 26 schools? What if they just pick to try to get the 32, like, I don't know, like the entire NFL is 32 teams. They could go ahead and pick, like, okay, we're going to go ahead and we like to have our conferences touch. Oklahoma, you want to come in? We'll take you. We'll take Florida State, Georgia Tech, Clemson, Virginia, like Virginia Tech maybe. And they just pick and choose 6 other schools. And then they kind of just make regional pods of like 4 to 6 teams or whatever. You have a bigger conference pool, but then they're able to sell like their own streaming network. Like, streaming's the future. Like, you want more people. They're not going to add like an Iowa State. I know some Big 12 people last round were saying that Iowa was going to make the Big 10 take Iowa State. No, they're not. No, because you're going to tell schools like, oh, you guys are going to have to give us $5 million a year. We're going to lose. Because people in Iowa are already going to buy the streaming app, like the Big 10 Network or whatever the app is called. Hell, they could join with the Pac-12, call it the Rose Bowl Network, and then just show highlights of like Rose Bowl, Rose Parades, all kind of stuff. Who knows who you're able to draw in. But they just want more teams. And unless all these teams combine into one giant conference, I just don't think, I just don't think 4 is going to work. That's what everyone wants, but I don't think it's going to stop there. Because once the 4 settled, if, let's say, just for argument's sakes, we hide the ACC on this list, there's a $20 million gap between the Big 10 and the 4th conference, the Pac-12. $20 million gap. How are they going to compete for a national championship in 10 years if like 10 times 20 is $200 million each school? That includes like Rutgers will eventually have that much more money than Oregon, than USC. It just doesn't make sense for the long term that these big schools from other conferences are going to let themselves make that much less money when a USC could say, hey, we should be making that much money.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then you got to consider a team like Notre Dame, who's not even in a conference. One of the conference, I think hasn't the Big Ten been trying to pick up Notre Dame for the last couple of years? Is there any truth to that?
Well, I think Notre Dame signed an agreement with the ACC saying that if they joined a conference, they have to join the ACC. They did join the Big Ten in hockey, which is another thing. Like, there were some rumors to the Pac-12 thing. Like, I didn't pull that out of the thin air. Apparently, Arizona State and the Big Ten have been in talks to get like them into the hockey conference, where then by default, if they can pull in another West Coast school or two to add in a hockey team, then they're all going to be in the Big Ten Hockey Network. They also added in John Hopkins is in the Big Ten now. A lot of people don't know. Like, the Big Ten's picking and choosing teams that they know draw for certain sports. John Hopkins gets millions of viewers for their lacrosse team. So what does the Big Ten do? They add him for lacrosse. They know, like, hey, okay, we're gonna build this network. It's looking like they're gonna make their own streaming app, and theirs is different. I don't think the SEC, they don't own their network. I think the Big Ten, owns like 50 or 49% of their own network. So they can kind of call the shots. Fox owns the rest. The one that owns it all, I think, is the Pac-12, and it's kind of hurting them now if you look at the numbers. So you have to kind of have a partner that helps you push it out. But like, what's to say if Fox doesn't just kind of make their own Fox Sports streaming app and they roll in the Big Ten network? And that's where some people think Oklahoma's going to come in, because I think Fox already owns the Big 12 rights, which Oklahoma is, plus they own the Big Ten network. So it's very natural for them to go ahead because they already have the infrastructure to join the Big Ten network. They already have that set up. I don't think the ACC schools have that set up. I was reading somewhere where it's going to take $6 million per school to install the cable needed for them to broadcast their games, or the fiber internet, or whatever it is. So, but that went longer than I expected. So we'll go ahead. I'm sure we'll be bringing that up later, because it's all people are going to talk about once the numbers are actually finalized in the next year or two. And if Oklahoma is really telling Tom Osborne that they want to join the Big Ten, I'm sure we'll hear that on media days. But I did have some other college things to bring up real quick. Florida, which they might have it right now. Let me go ahead and switch this. Florida Gators are playing in the College Baseball World Series right now. They won the first game. They might have won the second game. If they win the College Baseball World Series, they will become the 6th school to win a national championship in football, basketball, and baseball. And they join Cal, Michigan, Ohio State, Stanford, and UCLA. So they would be the first Southern team. Basically, it's a Big Ten, Pac-12. Add into my Rose Bowl network right there. You have all the top schools throughout history that have won in other sports, even baseball. I think USC or Arizona State have a bunch. I think Arizona State had Barry Bonds. But they're joining elite company if they can pull it off. It surprised me. I thought Florida was already on this list. I knew Michigan was on it. Michigan also, I think they're the only school that has hockey too. So they're the only ones that have won national championships in the big 4 sports in the United States. I think Michigan State misses baseball. They've been close too. And Ohio State, I think, misses hockey. So, I mean, there are a couple that are close. Of course, the Southern schools don't play hockey, which is why this is from the NCAA account. They were sending this out today. So there's that. I was going to mention just quick. The next thing I had for college, draft picks. We talked a little bit about drafts yesterday, or last week, I mean. So this year, the NFL draft happened in April. We covered that. Major League Baseball draft and the NBA draft just happened. Someone put this together. I think someone on Reddit. These are schools, if you look at the list, that have had at least one player taken in all 3 of those drafts. Again, they don't put on hockey because not all schools have hockey teams. So it's a pretty impressive list. If you look at the schools, these are schools that are all around in terms of all sports. So most of the big names, Florida State's on here, Michigan's on here. Some of the other surprising ones, like Houston's on here, Wake Forest, I wouldn't have expected them. NC State, I figured they might be because of baseball and basketball. They always get someone in the NFL. Villanova, I think that's the V. So crazy list there, looking at that. What do you guys think of that? All like teams being competitive in all sports.
I do think that it's a good thing to be well-rounded so that you avoid some of the missteps of putting, like we had just talked about. If you're saying we're a football school and then all of a sudden your football program starts to drop off as a whole, it hurts you. I like the representation there by the ACC, that for the longest time they were more of a basketball school, with the Duke and Carolina being in there. And it is Wake as well. But I was surprised looking back at when Florida State actually joined the ACC, and it wasn't until around the early 90s that they had gotten into the ACC anyhow and trying to boost up their football numbers. So I think that as a whole it made the conference stronger because they brought their football where their basketball program really wasn't as strong. Now they've really picked the pace up over the last couple of years with Coach Hamilton, doing a good job building it up, but I like seeing the representation there in the ACC, that they have multiple schools there that are going across different sports. I think that's good for the conference. It's good for the viability, going down the road.
And if I'm looking at this list correctly, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here. It looks like out of the 18 teams, the ACC has six total teams here, and the Pac-12 actually has 5. So it's pretty interesting when you're talking about, with the previous conversation about money and the conferences and stuff like that. It looks like, the Pac-12 and the ACC are pretty, diverse in their different sports. And then you throw in a Villanova and a bunch of these other schools here. But it's interesting. It looks, off the top of my head, it looks like Michigan might be the only Big 12 school here. But they also have the most people that are going pro. So.
Indiana's there. I think, is that Indiana
okay.
at the bottom right?
Yeah, it is. Okay.
Help me out. Are there any SEC teams?
No.
I don't think there are. So if you're looking at it realistically, the 2 big earners, you point out the Big Ten only has 2, Michigan and Indiana, and the SEC has none. So go ahead, Jeff. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was, trying to point to. But I think it's a good thing. It's interesting. A lot of these schools here, have won respective championships in the recent years. You have Florida State there. I don't know. It's interesting. It's very interesting to see where all this talent's coming from. And I thought that I might see, an Ohio State or a USC on this list, but apparently not.
Well, I'm going to bring up the other list. So Cal, Michigan, Ohio State, Stanford, and UCLA. So Michigan's on the list this year, and they're all-time. They've won national championships in those sports. UCLA and Cal are both on there. So of the teams, like historically on that first list I brought up, 3 of those 5 schools are on here.
Yeah.
Which is impressive because if you think about it, like especially the Big Ten, I think a lot of them miss out on baseball just because of the weather. It's easier to have kids go south to play baseball. They could practice year round. I know Indiana made a big run the past couple years in the college baseball World Series. Michigan was in the tournament this year, and I think last year, past couple years probably. So that's where you're going to see the drop off in those. But yeah, overall, I'm surprised there are no SEC schools, considering the college baseball World Series is Florida versus LSU. All right, so I have one last thing because I know we're going long over an hour, which I figured would happen whenever we start doing these. Last thing I was going to show today was the Pittsburgh Penguins celebration. I don't know if you guys saw this. I'm not going to play the video, but they sent Bob Allen, who's a Pittsburgh broadcaster news guy. They sent him down into the heart of the Pittsburgh Penguins parade. And immediately there's no one around him when the video starts. He's like giving a thing like, hey, I'm down here where the people are celebrating the Penguins winning the Stanley Cup. And then people just swarm him. The still I'm showing here on the video, he actually pushes a girl out of the way. You can see he's gritting his teeth. He's like, get out of here. Because he even says, like, they've got to calm down or something like that. It's the funniest thing. I don't know how I missed it last week. I think this is from June 11th. But, yeah, pretty funny. Go ahead, Jeff. What do you think about this?
I just think it's hilarious, Basically, a reporter loses his cool. You have all these younger people celebrating the Pens winning the Cup. They probably just got a little rambunctious, being an older guy, probably, doesn't like to be touched, doesn't want anything to do with this, trying to, do his job. But to speak about that as well, like, I saw videos of the South Side the night when the Pens won the Cup. Oh, my goodness, it was chaos. They're in the streets. Stuff was being thrown, celebrating, Hopefully it was all good fun. Mayor Peduto said there really wasn't, any damage or arrest or anything like that. But it's just interesting. I know I saw videos of the cops on horses, and that's just the nature of the South Side. It gets a little crazy, but this reporter losing is cool. That's just hilarious to me. Like, just let it go, dude. The kids are trying to have fun. I'm not even the kids, There's grown-ass men out there just having fun. Like, I don't know. It's hilarious to me.
I kind of thought with the way that people were like jumping in front of the camera that you would think that they would have at least like had the respect of the reporter to like let him maintain front and center. Like, it's one thing to be behind him and like being rowdy and loud, but like to completely like jump in front of the camera the way that some of those people were. Like, I'm surprised that none of them like damaged the equipment, like falling into like the actual cameraman or anything like that. But definitely good footage. I think if you're actually out there doing that report, you almost have to just go in with the attitude that, you know, this is a paycheck and I'm just mailing it in, that I'm probably not going to get a whole lot of audio out of this because people are going to lose their mind. And it's like being situationally aware.
Well, I try to send you guys a still. I don't know if you can see it. That so if you want to check your phones. But you can see he pushes the girl kind of toward the camera. And like you said, Matt, I don't know how she didn't hit it. And he's definitely pissed off. You can tell by the face he's making as he pushes her. He just shoves her out of the way. And then he's like, he says something like, they need to let us do my job here. They need to let me do my job. He like keeps saying it. He's definitely flustered.
Oh yeah, it looks like
they would be able to find a younger guy. Like, hey, why don't we get someone that's a little excited about the Pens winning to go down there and cover it? It's got to just like get off my lawn. That's what I want to capture him.
Yeah, he's giving the girl a stiff arm there, saying these damn kids. Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I figured it would end on that. I hope you like the new format. That's it for this week. We're trying to add stuff in. Going to be posting these kind of things in the Reddit, on Twitter. I'm going to be trying to get them out before the show so you can kind of follow along at home. Again, if you want to watch live, we broadcast live around 9 on YouTube every Tuesday. And then this launches on your favorite podcast networks like iTunes and everything, Stitcher Radio, on Wednesday. And the video will be live on Wednesday in case you can't watch us live. So that's it for me. Any closing remarks, Jeff? We'll start with you.
Closing remarks, I have to say, I really do think the Power 5 conference is going to become 4 in the next couple years, and money is going to drive the conferences to maybe have an 18 playoff. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got this week. It was good talking to you guys as always.
Well, I'll say, I forgot to mention it earlier. You said about West Virginia not getting in the ACC because of academics. That's a farce. UNC doesn't even have classes for their athletes. They can do whatever they want. And then they let in Louisville anyway. So I would like to think that they got the worst end of that deal. But who knows? Louisville, they buy hookers for their players. They can recruit whoever they want. And we'll see if the NCAA even upholds. That banner should be in Ann Arbor. That should be Michigan's second basketball national championship. I'm putting it on the record. You can't just buy guys hookers and expect them to not come to your school.
Yeah.
Matt, what are your closing thoughts?
On the UNC side, I feel like Bobby Bowden needs his wins back, and until they properly discipline UNC for their non-class schedule, Bowden needs his wins back. It doesn't put him over the top, but he needs his wins back.
Agree. He definitely needs his wins back. I think if they're not going to punish schools, everyone should get their banners back. Put back up the Fab 5 banners. Put those back up. They have the Final Four. Put those up. I think everyone should just put the wins and everything back up and then be like, oh, well, until you punish these other schools, so-and-so other schools, Ole Miss is even on the chopping block. Like, start punishing schools or everyone should get everything back. Punish everyone or no one. But
yeah, and my last comment then, Reggie Bush's Heisman should come back. There's no reason a dude who just bought his mom a house when he came from nothing shouldn't have his Heisman when you have, schools and, people affiliated with teams getting hookers for young college kids. So Reggie Bush is my true Heisman winner.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, later.
All right, over and out.